Tired. Yeah, me too. I feel that way too. It's kind of like that. We're almost at like the midway point tired, but it's a small world stuck in my head. I don't know if it's like a special level of like torture or something. We're going to a Disneyland next week for the first time, and it's since before COVID. So it's been a long time. Last time we took my kids, they were 5 and 7, and now they're 8 and 10. Like, we don't have a stroller. It'll be crazy. I can eat all their churros. I'm so excited, right? But I have It's a Small World stuck in my head. I'm like, please leave. That's the worst song to have stuck in there. It's just on a loop over and over and over again. Anyway, I don't know. I shared that with you. It's in my head, but you can know what's playing in the background. But I wanted to talk for just a minute about your exam. Exam number 1. Hopefully you feel like it went pretty well. Everybody took it, so that's a good thing. But looking at the scores, I mean, most of you should be very, very happy. The high score, so just a little bit of like statistical information just to know the range of outcomes of everybody. The high score was 100. So there were a couple of people who got 100%, which is very exciting. The low score was at 80, which still is pretty amazing for a low. And then the average was 92. So a lot of A's, a lot of B's, which is great. It's what I would hope for. You could have your notes in the book. Again, hopefully you found it very straightforward and clear. I wrote everything on there, so I think it's very straightforward and clear. The average amount of time that people took to take the test was 64 minutes. So just a little bit of information. Everybody seemed to have plenty of time. A lot of really, really high scores. Even the low wasn't that bad. A was the average. So that's what you can expect for the exams going forward. There's 2 more of them in this class. There's a second exam and a third exam, and none of them are cumulative. They're just on their respective units. So from today, we start the next unit, and everything from today forward will be on the second exam, and then the third exam is just the last unit. So again, if you did really well on that, then what you're doing is working. I feel like I always give the same little like speech, but try and use the exam as a learning opportunity. If you are really happy with how you did, which should be almost all of you, if not all of you, do the same thing going forward in this next unit. If you wish you had done a little better, you could start studying a little earlier, or maybe do a little more reading. You probably have a good idea of what you could do a little bit better. And I'm always happy to meet with you too if you want to talk about that. But even the lowest score was still a really, really good score. So for the most part, really nicely done. Are there any like thoughts or comments or anything about the test? Hopefully it was, again, relatively clear, straightforward. Anything at all? Was it nice to be able to take it online? Okay. I can tell you the average is usually much lower should we have taken it in person without notes and everything, but feel good about that. Hopefully all of you are feeling really great. We start this second unit today. So we'll look at chapter 8, which kind of builds on the last chapter, disorders related to stress. So here we're going to talk about disorders that feature the body and body symptoms. Then we will look at mood disorders. We will have a QPR, like suicide prevention guest speaker, or it might be a video thing depending on their preference. We'll talk about eating disorders and substance disorders. So that's our next couple of units that we have going on, chapters in this next unit. And these slides and then the mood disorder ones are already up for you. So we'll jump into this. I also want to point out, and I'll remind you several times, but next Thursday. So I have a planned absence next Thursday because I'll be on It's a Small World, but just on a loop. In reality, it's a small world. So I won't be here next Thursday. So just something to remind you of and plan for Wednesday and Thursday next week. Doesn't affect you Wednesday, but I'll put it up on the board next week, but just to let you know a week in advance. Yeah.
So we don't.
No, so and I have it in the syllabus that next Thursday, yeah, it's going to be just a canceled class. I'm not going to give you homework or anything. It's just going to be a day where we don't have class. Okay? So you can sleep in a little bit. Think of me eating churros at 9 in the morning. I will definitely, the churro stands open at 9. I know this, or at least they used to. I don't know if they still do. So I'll be eating churros by 9 a.m. You can think of me doing that. All right. Any other thoughts, questions? Anything about the exam? Anything else before we move forward? Okay.
So chapter 8, again, I'm going out of order because I feel like this transitions really nicely from chapter 5. We talked about how stress affects the body and disorders related to stress and trauma. This chapter is about disorders that affect the body, and they're very directly connected to stress and trauma. So I think it's a nice transition. And what we'll look at in this chapter are disorders that, for the most part, we call either somatoform disorders or disorders featuring somatic symptoms. They're used kind of interchangeably. So somatoform disorders and disorders featuring somatic symptoms are basically the same thing. If you look at the word somatic, soma translates to mean body. So these are disorders that affect the body. They're going to cause physical symptoms in the body, or it's somebody who's paying way too much attention to things going on in their body. It has some body element connected to it. So the somatoform disorders that we'll talk about first are some kind of physical illness or ailment that's explained largely by psychosocial or psychological causes. And the key to these, and we'll talk about this quite a bit, is that the person doesn't necessarily know that they're doing this. They don't want the symptoms. They're not guiding them. They're not on purpose in any way. We'll talk about that in contrast to faking in a little bit. But these are disorders in which people have symptoms come up, and they're caused by psychological factors rather than like physical ones. And they aren't doing it on purpose. Disorders where people lose sensation in part of their body, or they lose a sense, like going blind, and they're not doing it on purpose. They might not even have awareness that they're doing it. Or they're obsessing about every little like symptom in their body and kind of making themselves sicker. That's another way this can show up. But as a group, these disorders used to be called hysterical disorders. And hysteria is a really, really interesting term. It has like a kind of a wild history if you look at this term throughout time. But in its kind of common or colloquial use, when we say someone is being hysterical, what we mean is like they can't get their emotions under control. Like calm down, you're being hysterical means that somebody has like emotional excess. So we could say, if we look at the history of this in common use, hysteria means emotional excess. Right? So you can't get your emotions under control, you're being hysterical. But if you go back in time, this word has meant quite a few different things over time. Yeah. It could be, I guess any kind of emotional excess. So like if you couldn't stop laughing and couldn't get yourself under control, someone might say, hey, you're being hysterical, right? Calm down. It could be, that totally could be either laughing, it could be crying, it could just be just more emotion than you can manage. It's kind of generally the way we look at it. So if we go back to like the 7th century, looking at this word hysteria, right? 7th century, this was thought to be a medical condition that only affected women, because the word hysteria comes from the word hysteris, which translates to uterus. Right? So hysteris, uterus, right, in Latin, in Greek, not Latin. And so this was thought to be an issue that disturbance of the uterus. Okay, so only obviously affecting women. If we go forward a little bit more, the 19th century, this transitioned to be something that we thought was a sexual dysfunction. Again, only affecting women. And here's where it starts to get wild, things you probably didn't think you would learn about today in this class. But when people had hysteria, when women had hysteria, the treatment for this was to go to a medical doctor and have them manually stimulate the genitals until you had a frustrated orgasm, which would put your uterus back in place and cure your hysteria. Now people, I love the look on your face, right? So this was a really interesting condition, right? So women were thought to have like some dysfunction with their uterus, causing all kinds of behavioral and emotional issues. So they would go to a doctor, and over the course of like 45 minutes to an hour, that doctor would, skillfully frustrate and manipulate them to the point of a frustrated orgasm. And it was thought to put the uterus back in place and cure these issues. Now, this treatment became wildly popular. Women lined up and went to doctors. Doctors were having problems keeping up with the demand of all these hysterical women. Doctors were developing like issues in their hands and their elbows from like all of this time they spent stimulating women. And so it led to the development of the vibrator, right? Interesting, just a random side note for you. It was called Granville's hammer, the first vibrator, after the Dr. Granville who invented it. It was developed in order to help treat this because they couldn't keep up with the demand of all these hysterical women. Totally random stuff you probably didn't think you'd learn about today. But there's a movie called Hysteria that is all about that. It's a really interesting movie. It's probably about 12 years old or a little bit more at this point. But the whole movie is about all these hysterical women back in like the 19th century. And it talks about the development of the vibrator, testing it out for the first time. It was this massive, the first one was a steam powered size of a room, right? They've come a long way since then. But interesting history here. And then it morphed one more time as we moved into the future, but it was a sexual dysfunction treated through that mechanism back in the 19th century. In the 20th century, a couple of people like Charcot and Freud kind of changed this view of hysteria another time. So it went from a medical disorder to a sexual dysfunction to now it became a psychological disorder. And we use treatment methods like hypnosis and mesmerism, primarily affecting women, but could affect men as well. But we would treat people through like mesmerizing or hypnotizing them as a way to try and find out what was going on and get at their hysteria, talk through it, work through it, and then it would go away. So next time somebody calls you hysterical, you could just kind of think of like this crazy background to it. I mean, obviously this was probably the most interesting part, but it went from a couple of different transitions. These disorders, somatoform disorders, used to be called hysterical disorders, but there's only one of them that really fits that criteria. So they changed the name a couple of DSMs ago to now be called somatoform disorders featuring somatic symptoms. There are kind of two main disorders featuring somatic symptoms. There's conversion disorder and somatic symptom disorder. And conversion disorder was the one that would fit the term hysteria. This was something that was called hysteria for a lot of years. This would be what Freud and Charcot viewed as hysteria. But the first one is by far the most dramatic. The second one, a little less, it's a little more common. Was that a? Yeah, Freud only treated women. All of his patients were hysterical women for the most part. Later in his career, he treated like people, like men and women. But in the beginning, he really only worked with women. And he was a strange guy, right? Really interesting, really sexist, right? His ideas really revolved around like women and being weak and having these like unmanageable emotional excesses. Very different time though, too, like over 100 years ago. You know, women were viewed as weaker and having disorders more frequently than men. So he really only worked with women for the most part. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. With the, yeah, I mean, the term hysteria has kind of gone out, you know, because conversion disorder would be like the representation of this. And in a way, it fits for that one disorder, right? Somebody can't manage all this emotion, and so they convert it into something physical. So in that one context of conversion disorder, I would say it fits pretty well, but it doesn't really fit anything else. So I think if you compartmentalize it into that one little pocket, I think it's okay. But beyond that, it's kind of an outdated term at this point. Mm-hmm. So conversion disorder, as I said, by far the most dramatic, and it's also quite rare, but you do see it happen. This is where somebody has something traumatic happen to them, either really stressful, really emotional, really traumatic. And because they cannot handle the trauma, they convert it into physical symptoms that affect their functioning. So somebody sees something really awful and they start to lose their vision. They have something traumatic happen and they lose sensation in their hand or their foot, right? It usually involves the loss of a sense or the loss of an ability or like movement of a certain area of your body. And it's in response to something traumatic. Right? And the key with this, the key with conversion disorder is that you don't know that you're doing it, right? You can cause yourself to go blind and lose your vision without intentionally wanting to do so, which is just wild to think that you could do that unconsciously. And the treatment for this, once you start to come to grips with whatever it is that caused you to lose your vision, it would start to come back, right? It's so wild, right? To think that your brain can do that subconsciously. There was a story in the news, I want to say it was about 8 years ago at this point. There was a young man who accidentally shot a boy in combat over in a war situation. He shot this young boy on accident and he started having problems in his hand, right? Shortly after this accident, his finger went numb and then it spread to his hand and then it started going up his arm. Now, as you can imagine, if you couldn't move your finger or your hand or your arm, you would go to a medical doctor. They ran every test on his finger, his hand, his arm, testing the nerves, testing everything, running all these exams. Nothing was physically wrong with this guy. Right? Nothing at all. But when they probed a little bit deeper, the finger that he started to lose sensation in was his trigger finger. And then it spread to his hand and up his arm. Right? And as he went to therapy and tried to deal with this trauma of shooting this young boy, the sensation in his hand and his arm and everything started to come back. And that's kind of how this tends to present. It's very dramatic. And it's typically in response to something that's kind of larger or traumatic in nature. And so you convert the emotional trauma into a physical symptom. And that's the essence of this disorder. You can't handle it emotionally, so you convert it to something physical. And I have an example of this. It's not perfect, but it's actually not that bad either. It's from King of the Hill, if you've ever watched that show. There's an example in this show where Hank sees his mom having sex and he goes blind as a result of it. Now, much slower, both on the beginning of the symptoms and also the treatment of it. But with conversion disorder, the really big key to this first one, you're not aware that you're doing it. You're not doing it on purpose. You're not guiding those symptoms. They happen to you kind of unconsciously. And as soon as you deal with whatever caused them, they tend to start to go away. So it does tend to be a temporary condition, usually brought on by something traumatic that you witnessed or participated in some way. Way less dramatic, but way more common is the second one, somatic symptom disorder. With this one, people have a lot of bodily symptoms going on, right? There's stuff going on in their body that is disproportionate to actually what is wrong in their body. So they're having all these kind of physical symptoms that they're experiencing, but they're not necessarily being caused by anything being physically wrong. They're being caused by stress and emotions. And it can take two different patterns. So somatic symptom disorder can present as somatization pattern or predominant pain pattern. Right? So this somatic symptom disorder takes two different forms. Somatization pattern, sometimes called Brickett syndrome, is a situation where people have a bunch of different physical ailments going on. So in order to be diagnosed with somatization pattern, you have to have 4 different groups of symptoms. So you have to have a severe pain symptom. So something in your body is causing you a lot of pain, right? It could be headaches, chest pain, like any kind of neck pain. It could be anywhere. You have some kind of pain symptom. And again, it's not being caused by a physical problem. It's being caused by something psychological. You also have to have a gastrointestinal symptom. So something related to your stomach, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, right? People have some kind of stomach related issue that's causing them problems. And these don't have to be like massive or dramatic. They might just be something that's kind of nagging and smaller. But you have a pain symptom, a gastrointestinal symptom. You also have to have a neurological symptom. So that could be numbness, tingling, loss of sensation in part of your body, some kind of neurological issue that's presenting, and then finally, a sexual symptom as well. Right, so something related to like sexual functioning, maybe menstrual difficulties, erectile difficulties of some kind, failure to be able to reach an orgasm, again, without any kind of actual physical issue being the problem. All of these are being caused by emotional or psychological stuff. So something going on in this person's life is causing a bunch of kind of smaller symptoms to present. And the key is to deal with the stress or anxiety or whatever it might be that's driving all of it. And then all of these things would go away. This can be really difficult to diagnose because somebody who has a lot of stuff going on, they might go to the doctor and be like, oh, I'm constantly like nauseous and like throwing up and I'm not getting better, right? That could by itself be something completely different. Or like I'm having a pain symptom that might not be all of them viewed together, right? So it can be very easily missed. But traditionally, it's caused by anxiety and stress. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to have all four on like a smaller level. And so the problem is that someone might go to the doctor and they might not look at it all together. All right. Like a medical doctor might be like, oh, okay, you're having headaches. Let me give you something for the headaches. And you're having stomach aches. Let me give you something for that, rather than putting it all together as one picture. This one is pretty straightforward. The other pattern that you go up is just a pain pattern. So somebody with this has more severe pain than you would expect for what's going on in their life, or like with a medical condition that they might have. So pain onset, severity, or continuation is much more severe than it should be. And so maybe someone is having a lot of pain because they get reinforced for that pain or get sympathy for that pain, or they have a lot of anxiety and stress, which is exacerbating the amount of pain that they feel. So with both of these, it's not nearly as severe or dramatic as conversion disorder, which was traditionally known as hysteria, but they're way more common, just very commonly misdiagnosed and missed just in general as well. But all of these, everything on this slide, not on purpose, not intentional, you're not even aware that you're doing it. In direct contrast to this, there are plenty of times where people fake something. So none of these are faked, but this one is faked. There are people who fake illness in order to get sympathy, attention, or whatever it might be, right? And when people kind of fake an illness, we call that factitious or fictitious disorder. And it's sometimes popularly known as Munchausen Syndrome. Okay, the technical diagnostic name is factitious disorder. The popular name, Munchausen syndrome. So with this, people fake illness or fake a medical condition in order to get sympathy. Now, I would be willing to bet that every single one of you in this room at some point in your life has faked being sick to get out of something. All those smiles, I just saw a lot of smiles, right? It's just common. We've all done it. I remember when I was little, I didn't want to go to school. And so I faked being sick so I wouldn't have to go. This was back before like the nice digital thermometers. It was the old ones that you put in your mouth. And I remember my mom put a thermometer in my mouth and left the room. And so I ran over and put it up against the light bulb so it'd get nice and hot, right? So I'd have a fever. She came back, she's like, 105, huh? You should be dead, right? I went too far. But I was trying to fake being sick because I didn't want to go to school, right? When we fake illness, sometimes it's rewarding. You don't have to go to work. You don't have to go to school. People feel bad for you. They take care of you. Maybe you get to lay there and watch like TV or movies or something all day and you don't have to deal with life, right? This can get rewarding for people. And so sometimes what happens is people start to do this chronically, right? They start faking or intentionally producing symptoms in order to get that sympathy and attention from other people. And so the key with this is that it's a purposeful faking, either to get out of something or to achieve some kind of an end. I have a little clip of this as well that I'll play for you really quickly, and then we'll talk about it more. If you've seen, oh my gosh, Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights, right? He's faking having paralysis so that he can get out of it. Like he has convinced himself that he's paralyzed because he doesn't want to have to go back to racing, right? And sometimes what happens is people start to believe their own lies that they tell themselves, and they can start to really like even manifest those symptoms, but the whole point is that it's purposeful faking, right? It's not unintentional. You're not doing this like accidentally. It is on purpose. And so again, we would call that factitious disorder. Traditionally, if somebody does this like once or twice, it's not necessarily a disorder. But when they start doing it repeatedly and they start upping the ante, then we would call it factitious disorder. And again, the popular name for this is Munchausen Syndrome, named after a Prussian nobleman years and years ago who used to tell these tall tales of skipping across cannonballs across the battlefield. There were just these very exaggerated stories, and it was named after him. But when people have this kind of a chronic extreme version, we tend to use this term as like a popular way of referring to it. Now, Munchausen syndrome is when you do this to yourself. Munchausen by proxy is when you make somebody else sick in order to get attention from them. Right. And very traditionally, that's like a parent making a child sick because everybody will feel bad for them because their child isn't doing well. So this can be something that definitely manifests. You have to look at what are the things that are rewarding it, what's maintaining it. And I have to tell you that I have someone in my family that is like an extreme version of Munchausen syndrome, to the point where she's actually kind of been eliminated from our family. Like nobody talks to her anymore because she's upped the ante so many times. But my partner's sister, her name is Kim, Crazy Kim. Everyone calls her Crazy Kim. Even my kids call her Crazy Kim. They say we don't talk about Bruno, so we don't talk about Kim. No, like all the. Now I have that in my head instead of it's a small one. We don't talk about Bruno. I think that's an upgrade, maybe. But Kim, when I first met my partner almost 20 years ago at this point, when I met her, like it was Christmas time, and she was going to introduce me to her family. And she was telling me that her sister had kidney cancer, right? And she's like, my sister, like, she was telling me all about this, and I was like, oh my God, that's awful. I'm so sorry. Like, we had just met, and I was like, that's awful. Is she going to be okay? And she's like, oh, it's nothing. Don't even worry about it. Oh my God, you're cold, right? And it turned out that like her sister has faked stuff for years, right? And so nobody was reacting anymore. But I met her sister, and it was like one thing after another for the last 20 years. So first it was kidney cancer, and then that just like magically went away. And then she started, she had a brain tumor, and then that went away. Like it was there and then it was just gone. And then she had another type of cancer and that went away. And then she had seizures at some point and then that went away. She had a pregnancy that went away. Like she had just thing after thing after thing after thing. Over time, she would fake these things in order to get attention. And she kept upping the stakes. Like it started out with smaller stuff when she was younger, but then it was more and more and more and more, to the point where it was actually very like toxic for the whole family, and people stopped responding. The scary thing is about 10 years ago, she had a daughter, same age as my oldest, and her daughter started getting sick. And so what happened, in my opinion, is that people stopped responding to her, and so she started making her daughter sick in order to get attention, which is a very common pattern that you see with this. People tap those around them out. Right in the beginning, people are sympathetic, but when it keeps happening over and over again without explanation, people lose that sympathy. You don't get the reaction you want anymore. So within 2 weeks of being born, her daughter was in the hospital violently sick. And all anyone in the family could think was like, oh, Kim is doing that to her daughter. And her daughter has had so many illnesses over the years. And every time I'm so skeptical that it's something that maybe has been produced. This can be something that you purposefully fake. So people sometimes will ingest things to make themselves sick. They'll hurt themselves to get attention. I had a client once years ago, obviously at this point, her boyfriend was about to break up with her. And so she walked out in front of a car and like a parking lot. So it wasn't going that fast, but she walked out in front of a car so she would get hit enough to have a massive like bruise and slight injury so that he wouldn't leave her. Right. And it worked, sadly. Like she was reinforced for it. She had this massive injury, had to like rest for a couple of weeks, and he stayed with her to take care of her. So in her mind, it was successful. This can be, again, like purposefully fake. People oftentimes know quite a bit about whatever it is they're faking. They might be very well versed in whatever it is that they're trying to present with. But factitious disorder and Munchausen's, same thing, just different names for the same disorder. Anyone have people in your life like that who fake stuff? Any like comments or thoughts or questions or anything? Yeah.
really the one person in school.
Mhm.
Like, and this so many days, just like I would sit in the bathroom and like not like sit until school ended. Because if I would like get out too early, then my mom would take me to school.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I'm just sitting and like it came out like for like 6 hours or whatever.
Right, if I leave, I'll have to go to school. Yeah. Yeah, and again, I wouldn't worry about it. If like you do this periodically, especially when you're younger, but it can lead to like a pattern later where people become very obsessed with it. Any other like stories or thoughts or anything? Yeah.
I have a couple similar. Like, most recently, it was like, she needed a service done. And then it was, she got the attention for that, and then, oh, why?
Yeah.
She explained the whole process of getting service done, and she never got it.
Mhm.
And most recently, it's now she's going deaf. And we're all.
Are you really? Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard because you want to believe people, right? When they say that they're going deaf or they need a service dog or they're having issues. But when you're repeatedly having things that just kind of go away, right? People stop believing you at some point, right? Yeah.
Same story, someone's grandma. And she said like she would always complain like hanging and thing, and then like come up with like new things and it was different. So it's like what she was saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
It turns out like they took us like different doctors and stuff. And then the really different different.
Okay. Yeah. And oftentimes people who have this love the attention from doctors. They love medical attention. And so it's very common that this person might go from doctor to doctor presenting with these symptoms to get that attention and sympathy and so on. It's very, very common. Yeah. Oh, a little bit, right? Her mom, it was like Munchausen by proxy, right? Like she kept telling her that she was super sick. And like kind of presenting that to get sympathy. Yeah, so yeah, that was, and there's a whole documentary that was made on that. Really interesting. And we'll look at them actually, Gypsy Rose and her boyfriend when we get to the last chapter, when we're talking about forensic stuff. But yeah, there was some element of that in there as well. Really, really interesting. My partner, so Kim, it was like 6 years ago. This was the last straw for me. 6 years ago, Kim called and she's all like, I need a kidney. Right, the kidney cancer is back, and she called my partner, her sister, was like, I'm going to need one of your kidneys. Will you save my life? Like, I'm dying. I need one of your kidneys. I was like, oh, hell no. I want the doctor to call me. That's my kidney too, right? It's like, I want the doctor to call me and tell me that she needs that kidney in order to survive. And only then may you give her a kidney. And it just, again, it went away, right? It's just something that's constantly there, and people up that ante. I have an example of this from a show. It's kind of a fun show to watch if you've ever seen it. The Untold Stories of the ER are really interesting. It's like a dramatic reenactments of ER cases. But there was one that featured a young man who has Munchausen syndrome. And I did my best to edit out a bunch of things because there's obviously commercials and other stories. So I kind of edited some of it out, but forgive some of the rough transitions. I did my best. But I went up there and yelling and screaming, completely acting, right, in order to get attention. In his case, he didn't actually swallow the razor blades, right? He knew, though, how to manipulate an x-ray, right? He knew where to put them so that they would appear to be in the stomach. It's that kind of stuff, well researched, right? Knew exactly what to do to fake it, knew all of these different elements. And as they said, has gone from hospital to hospital to hospital, doing something very similar. Now, this could be incredibly costly for this young man, right? Insurance, the second they found out that it's being faked, if he had insurance, it would not in any way be paid for. All of those medical procedures would then cost him like money out of pocket. So this could be a very, very expensive thing should he get caught like that. But you can see just the links that he went to. Now, in some cases, somebody might actually swallow those blades to really fake this. But he knew what to do in order to make it look like they were in his system without actually doing that. Did you have a?
America is not the place to be doing.
No.
Social.
Yeah, I mean, that could be thousands and thousands of dollars. He had like an endoscopic like procedure, plus being put under, plus being admitted to the hospital. I mean, easily like $5,000 to $10,000, like from that one visit alone. And if he's doing this repeatedly, you know, that could be very costly for him, for sure. Any other thoughts or comments or anything? Again, that's kind of what it can look like. That's a pretty severe case. But this is something a lot of people do. And again, if you do it to somebody else, we would call it Munchausen by proxy. So doing it to somebody else to get sympathy and attention from their pain and struggling, traditionally a child, right? Or maybe even a parent could also be another way this would manifest. Yeah. It's just a popular term. So both of these, the technical diagnostic term is factitious, sometimes fictitious disorder. I've heard it both ways, but factitious disorder. And then this is just more of like the common popular term. They're used really interchangeably, but either one, like I'll never ask you the difference between the two because they're kind of the same. It's like another example of that would be we say sociopath and psychopath, but the technical diagnostic term is antisocial personality disorder. So there's like a common cultural term versus the actual diagnostic term. All right. One more disorder in this category, illness anxiety disorder. So this used to be called hypochondriasis, someone being a hypochondriac. Right. All I can ever think of with this, with illness anxiety or hypochondriasis, if you've ever watched Doc McStuffins, there's a little character in there, Chili the snowman, who is like the ultimate hypochondriac. Right. All I can think of with this is that little snowman. He's always convinced that he's violently sick, right, and has to go to the doctor. Right. Anyway, but watched my fair share of Doc McStuffins over the years. Not so much anymore, but still. With this, people tend to mistakenly fear that every little thing going on with their physical functioning is something incredibly serious. So my foot is hurting. It must be like a tumor or cancer or something really bad. I have a headache. It's got to be a brain tumor. Stomach hurting must be cancer. Right? Like spot on my skin cancer. Like every little thing is interpreted as something life-threatening and serious. Now, the hard thing is it could be, right? But traditionally, this is somebody who's reacting that way to every little thing that happens to them. And so oftentimes spending a lot of time preoccupied with their health. And I don't think Google does us any favors, or like WebMD does us any favors. You're shaking your head, right? If you type in like anything in Google, it's like 50% of the time it's cancer, right? Like you either have like a headache or it's cancer, right? Like it's incredibly like disconcerting when you try and look up your symptoms online, but we all do it, right? Like we do it commonly. And oftentimes people with this disorder, they're catastrophizing, always assuming the worst. So they're preoccupied with having or acquiring a serious illness. They have a lot of anxiety about their health. Very, very common for this individual to go to doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor. Like they go from person to person until somebody confirms their worst fears. So maybe they're having headaches, which could be brought on by stress, right? And maybe these stress headaches that they're having are just that, but they will go from doctor to doctor to doctor until somebody decides to give them that MRI or CAT scan just to double check that it's not something more serious. So it's very common that they spend a lot of time in pursuit of their health or doing health-related behaviors. It also tends to be something that has to last for some time, at least 6 months. So us having a little bit of this is totally normal, especially with so many health concerns in our culture over the last couple of years. We see more and more of this kind of stuff, people being preoccupied and worried about their health and illness. But this is something that's long lasting, has a lot of behaviors, a lot of doctor like chasing in order to get that diagnosis. And it tends to be more common in people who are older, right? The older you get, right, the more fear that people tend to have about like life-threatening illnesses. And so we see this being something that's much more common in individuals who are a little bit older. Definitely much higher frequency in that age range. Yeah.
Is there any disorder you actually have?
How do you mean? So say a little, like, what do you mean?
A couple of days ago, someone that knew their father, because he without any water going to his start and you like regular start fluid taken out.
Sure.
And eventually, no, I'm not going to really just die.
Huh.
So
Wow.
would it be a disorder just to be stubborn enough not to treat yourself?
I mean, it's not, sadly, I mean, it's just a character like trait, or even you could say a character flaw at that point. I mean, to just refuse like that. I mean, there are a lot of reasons people refuse treatment, like they're over it, they don't believe in treatment, they believe in other things, right? Yeah, so sadly, being stubborn isn't enough, though they can definitely be a toxic trait, right? Even if it's not necessarily a disorder. Yeah, that's really sad. Like that's awful, you know. But yeah, sadly, it's not enough to be like a mental illness. Other questions or thoughts or anything here? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So something is, so with factitious disorder, people tend to either create or fake symptoms. So they ingest something to make themselves sick, or they completely make up symptoms and pretend that they're sick to get like attention or whatever. This person might actually have headaches or stomach aches. And then what happens is they interpret them as being life-threatening. And they often go and like to doctor to find out if it is life-threatening, versus the other is purposefully faked. If that makes sense. So there's actually something going on here. Somebody has medical problems, but rather than seeing them as something small, like my toes hurt because my shoes don't fit very well, right? No, it's got to be like peripheral neuropathy or something big and serious. So that's the big difference between the two. I'm glad you asked. So with all of these that we've talked about today, very, very related to stress, trauma, anxiety, right? People have a lot of anxiety about their health, or a lot of stress in their life, or something traumatic happens, and like these are the ways that they react. There's also a lot of behavioral and cognitive explanations, right? From a behavioral standpoint, I'm sick and people take care of me and I don't have to do my responsibilities, and there's sympathy. Yeah, I've been rewarded, right? That's operant conditioning. I've been reinforced for my behavior, so I'm going to do it again. Or maybe cognitively, you think it's the only way you can get attention, right? The only way for me to feel like anyone cares about me is for me to pretend to be sick. And that's how I'm going to get that attention. So people have maybe learned negative ways of receiving attention. Even negative attention is still attention, right? So people who've been really deprived of any kind of like sympathy or attention as a child might find ways to get that, right? And that's a kind of a behavioral explanation, or even looking at the thoughts that people have that might be driving that behavior. And difficult, like oftentimes people aren't going to seek therapy for these things, right? Like if you woke up and had no vision, you wouldn't go to a therapist, right? You would go to a doctor, you go to the hospital. And sometimes it can be very difficult to identify these disorders. You go to the hospital because you're blind, they run every test and they can't figure it out. The way that we tend to notice these is they manifest a little bit differently than traditional blindness or traditional like paralysis. People don't present the exact same way, and that can tip off the doctor that maybe something else is going on. But therapy doesn't tend to be a common like treatment. People tend to seek multiple opinions until they have somebody confirm their worst fears or confirm what's going on in their life. Once we figure out the root of it, that's really the key. When did this start? When was the first time that Kim got attention for acting out and pretending to be sick? And I should ask her mom, right? Because she would know. Like, when did this begin? Probably when she was quite young, right? And so if we can go back and figure out like what started it, then we can go back and look at ways to challenge that and different ways to get attention and so on. Maybe some exposure and response prevention or medication if we think that's an underlying issue. But for the most part, we're trying to figure out what's driving it, and then maybe working through that, finding better ways to get the attention and sympathy and all of that you need, rather than faking an illness or converting it to something or whatever it might be. So very driven by stress and trauma and anxiety, along with some behavioral and cognitive stuff as well. And we'll talk about, when I see you on Thursday, there's a couple of other little side notes in this chapter, some physical stress disorders and like behavioral medicine stuff that we'll talk about. But I do have a little homework assignment for you. And I think these are really interesting. So what I found here is I found 4 stories that were actually real news stories about people who have one of the disorders that we talked about today. I shortened them a little bit because some of them are quite long. But what you'll see is I have this little case study in somatoform disorders, and there's 1, 2, 3, and then a 4th one on the back. And again, these are all real stories of people who have one of the disorders that we talked about today. And then number 5, you're going to create your own story or create your own scenarios. So if you are thinking of somebody in your life, a couple of you shared stories of people in your life who might have this, you can blend like a movie or TV character, or you can just create something randomly, that's totally fine. But for number 5, you're going to create your own example, your own story, write it out, and then give me the disorder that it is. And for 1 through 4, you're going to read it, decide which disorder, and explain why. Now you're welcome to work on this with somebody else if you want to, or do it on your own. This will be due next class. We'll go over it together and then I'll correct it. And again, what I love about these is that they are actually things that happen. So all you need to write on here is which disorder you think it is, just from the ones from today, right? Just from this chapter. And then you will write your own for the last. Okay. And then one for Quincy. Okay. So again, read through this, right? And then for 1 through 4, which disorder from today does this person have and why? And then number 5, I want you to create your own scenario. Feel free to have fun with it, be creative, and then make sure that you also give me which disorder that you are representing for that one. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. It's close. If they have all the like side behaviors of spending a lot of time worrying about and being preoccupied with it and going to doctors, like, because you might understand what you have, but then like catastrophize it in a way. Yeah, it could still fall into that a little bit as well. So what I'll do is I'll stop here because we just have a couple of minutes left. Again, next time we'll finish up the last few slides. I'll collect this after we talk about it. We'll finish this up and then we'll move on to chapter 6, which is already posted as well. So a little bit left and then we'll move on. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll leave these up here if you didn't get one for some reason, and then I'll see you on Thursday.